on the mobile years, and some footage has been added because doing the total film of 50 years, we had to limit each period, so we added some footage to the original film for tonight. And I just want to also remind you that Tuesday night at the Community Center, the film director and editor is going to be presenting a program on what's on the cutting room floor. All the footage that had to be, some of the footage that had to be left out of the film, but which is noteworthy and fun to watch. So I invite you all to join her there. And without further ado, here's the film.
The challenge in a project of the scale of Reston is that it exists in a larger economic context that rises and falls. And so there were times when I'm sure local real estate players and decision makers and elected officials wondered if it was going to be Robert Simon's folly.
Unless you were here at the time, you can't realize today how remote Reston was. It was really out there. If you went up lanes to the airport, you could see Reston, but you couldn't touch it.
The distance was a problem for people. There were no jobs in Reston. There were not that many jobs in Tysons in the 70s.
Probably one of the most significant things to the overgrowth of Reston was the toll road.
It created new entrances into Reston. And we began to take full-page ads out that said, "Welcome to Reston, D.C." It annoyed some people, but it clearly made the point.
We became part of Fairfax County policy to see the Reston, Dulles, Fairfax, Tysons corridor develop as the heart of business for the Washington area. And it happened.
It was just an unbelievable growth pattern right out the Dulles corridor, and we were at the heart of this corridor. We had 2 to 2.5 jobs for every household. We were a net importer of jobs. Second largest workplace in Virginia, second only to Tysons Corner, and bigger than most downtowns.
Sperry has 1,100 high-tech professionals here in Reston. We're here because the engineers want to live here, and we can recruit them.
It's a very flexible environment in that we can accommodate people close to our headquarters no matter what their position, which is not often the case in many other communities.
It takes a lot of money to build a place like Reston, and it takes a very big company like Mobil to have that kind of money. One of the numbers I heard was that they had put $250 million into this community before they actually got a return. The opening of North Point Village was a great way of saying, well, there's a whole new part of Reston to be built.
How many children are there in Reston?
Well, the last time I counted, there were
Playing fields.
25.
Styles of homes.
We have 31 different projects that are going on now, and Reston is 20 years old, so 40, 50 different styles of hospitals.
How many trees?
350 million.
We like the greens, we like the trees, the lakes, and the houses are built in the community, within the trees.
Everything that anyone could ask for is right here in Reston.
It's fun. It's like living in a resort.
It's my home. It's all right here in
It's
Reston.
all right here in Reston, every bit.
Visit the Reston Visitor Center.
They invested in building a reputation for the place. They invested in building a brand for the place, which I think lingers even to this day. We did a beautiful photograph of a champagne glass, and the shadow was not the shadow of a champagne glass, it was the shadow of a beautiful tree. And it just reminded people that no matter how many people come to live in Reston, there will always be more trees than people.
The benefit of Reston's relationship with Gulf and Mobil was that those large companies had the staying power to get Reston past some of those initial cycles and those initial hurdles.
A lot of people give a lot of credit to the developer, and I do. But I don't want anybody to ever forget how important the community voice was in this.
There was a sense
sense of common purpose. There was a delight in civic activity. I think people did really want to be part of this community and help make it better and stronger. And each time a need arose in the community, we all found ways to create a new solution.
We were shocked to find out that there were homeless people, in fact, homeless families, living in Reston. And there was a big community effort, initially by the churches and Reston Interfaith, to help these people. The more this happened, the more we realized how many people there were, how many families there were, how many children there were living in Reston without a home. We had to do something about it.
Let's bring it down to my size. It's not many communities throughout the United States that band together and say there are less fortunate people than we are, and we want to be helpful. We're going to have a shelter for the homeless in Fairfax County.
Across the county, there were other homeless people, and other communities were fighting the very idea of a homeless shelter. Every time the board of supervisors wanted to put one in, there's a huge cry that we're not going to have them, not in our community.
Reston begged the county to build a homeless shelter in its soon-to-be town center. I was proud to be in a town where people said, yes, I want it right in my backyard.
It really was Bob's idea about how community should work. That was the whole idea of weaving the social fabric early on, and certainly it's there.
In the next few minutes, you'll be meeting Reston's founder, Robert Simon. At that point, seeing Bob Simon was not something that happened very often. And everybody wants to talk to him. He's very sociable and loves to talk to people.
Do you ever walk to Lake Anne Center and shop? That's the way we do our shopping.
There were many people who wanted to continue having a relationship with him, who valued his opinions and valued what he thought about things. He really didn't have the authority at that point, but he always had an opinion.
Next time we go, great. All credit due to Gulf and Mobile, Gulf's successor, for preserving the master plan in its essence and its spirit. Mobile is putting in the crown jewel right now, the town center, which was there in the master plan originally.
Bob Simon had this view that at the center of this 7-village thing called the New Town, there was going to someday be a downtown, something that would hold it all together and give it kind of a heart.
It's not very often you have the ability to put in the center of a city, in essence, when you already developed the rest of the city or most of it.
We held it off the market until it was ripe.
We knew we wanted something different. We had malls all around us, number one, but more than that, that's not what we wanted.
We used to joke that malls were prisons for women. I mean, they were just so unadorned and blank walls, and all they needed was a barbed wire fence.
Everyone, the developer and the community, wanted town center to be vibrant and to have things going on almost constantly, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
We started off with what I would call a very suburban solution on Reston Town Center. It really wasn't creating a center the way that Lake Anne had done. We decided that we were going to do a plan analysis session at ULI. We basically had our head handed to us.
You're undershooting. You're not matching the potential of both Simon's original vision as well as the market opportunity that's going to emerge in Northern Virginia.
Maybe because of the lofty goals that Bob Simon set early on, everyone felt, well, we can't just do what's sort of expected. We should reach for something more.
In a Reston Town Center, the streetscape will be defining the space and bringing an urban form to a suburban setting.
We
was considered crazy to go to this couple hundred acres of suburban woods and build a grid of streets. Why did you build these meandering streets, bike paths, and all this? We were saying, no, we're going to bring an urban feeling, a mixed-use town that's built around a street where people go walk and shop and restaurants and cafes. And people say, well, if you were doing this in downtown DC or Boston or something, of course, Reston, like out there in the burbs.
Reston Town Center was a big risk and a big, bold venture, and there were a lot of skeptics.
There was a real question whether it would work or not. And we were dealing with a new concept. Again, it's Reston. If they want to try the town center, let them try it.
First and foremost, we were a town center. And town center meant it had to be the center of town for all of Reston, a central gathering place.
The plaza is the center of town center. And the fountain, of course, was the focal point.
This is a place where people will come even if they're not spending a nickel. We want people to come just to be here. If we can create that kind of place, then the commercial objectives will have been served.
On behalf of Mobile, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our newest and perhaps most elegant venture, Reston Town Center.
With today's unveiling, we salute another milepost that was part of Bob Simon's dream, the creation of a dynamic urban marketplace that will be a pace setter for America's new downtowns, but one that harkens back to the marketplaces of an earlier time.
Opening days are never as perfect as you want them to be. And our opening day was a monsoon. And the whole point of this project was welcoming people to an outdoor street with a public plaza, right? So that might have been one day where I said, we put a roof on top of this, would have been much better opening parties.
The town center was, at first, not successful. The market just wasn't there at that time.
We opened in the face of the worst recession in 1990 that we'd had in real estate until the current over the last few years.
When it came time to open Reston Town Center, and we had 6 tenants, we figured out we had to do something to give people something to do when they came to visit. We ended up doing a portable ice rink. We also came up with the idea of putting 300 Christmas trees up and down Market Street to hide the fact that there were no stores there. So we ended up coming up with the first holiday season campaign. The first year, we did everything we could to create an event. I can't say that we planned for it when we were doing the initial planning of Reston Town Center. We didn't really think through how the space would get used in all these different fashions. But as it turned out, it became part of the heart and soul of Reston Town Center.
Yeah, I think there's no question that Reston Town Center has become iconic. When we think about high-density suburban environments, Reston Town Center is the image that pops into your head.
That team took a lot of risk. I think they were a pioneer on the same caliber that Bob Simon was in terms of assembling Reston and getting it started. And we proved it could work.
Reston Town Center has become the urban core of a wonderful suburban development, an environment that is going to attract a lot of companies, a lot of different opportunities for people to be employed here. And we have now built over 4 million feet of space, which is by far the largest commitment we made to any community.
As you walk around and look at what developers are proposing, there are no malls. But everybody now is proposing what they might call lifestyle centers or main streets, and the influence of Reston Town Center is pretty clear.
thank you for that treat. That was wonderful. And now we have some live people to talk to live people in the flesh to talk about their experience and their part in making all that work. But it was great to see old friends like Martha and Priscilla. Anyways, so I think this evening we're going to start with Fran Steinbauer, because he was very instrumental in the toll road. And the toll road probably came before was the impetus for a lot of the commercial development in the town center. So we'll start with Fran, and then Jim will have a talk, and then we'll talk. Susie and Bill will go after that, and then we'll take your questions. So Fran.
I gotta protect myself. Oh, this isn't the homeowners meeting. I don't have to do it anymore. You can tell I was important for the mobile years. All the times you saw me on this screen? No. I spent the last 7 years of my time developing Reston during the mobile years, from 78 when the property transferred to 85. I'm going to digress just a little bit, seeing as she put me on first, and I didn't know it. I thought some recently about the experience of developing Reston and the new town, and I think I mentioned this to Susie one time. It's somewhat analogous to being a first-time parent in some ways. There's the very first part when, in order to have a child, you know what to do, but you don't know a whole lot more about raising a child. But when the child comes, it's beautiful, it's brand new, everybody coos over it, loves it, and then you say, okay, now how do I raise this thing? How do I make this better? Then there's the intermediate years, the teen years. And you really wonder, what are you doing and why? Because Ed's got all of the same things that a teenager has. It's rebellious, and boy, Reston was rebellious in those early years, at least as far as the developer was concerned. And all the pieces aren't there. You know, a little gangly on one side, a little gangly on the other side, but you have high hopes, and the developer's still like a parent is saying, well, I don't really know what I'm doing, but we got to make this thing roll. It's got to keep going. Then you get to what amounts to the mobile years. The coming of age of both the parent and the child in a lot of ways. The community has really taken shape and has its own form. And the job of the developer really is to tweak that, to pass on all of the information and the obligations to the community itself. And that's really where we are, and a lot of what got done during the mobile years. I focused a lot of mine, and says so in here, my time in those earlier mobile years on two major things. Transportation was maybe took most of my time, and it was something that really started a lot earlier than that, but it was right at the transition in the early years when we started to make some things happen. You know, Reston had over 1,000 acres of industrial land. I think that's right. I mean, 1,000 acres of industrial land, we hadn't touched 2% of it by 1978. And the reason was there wasn't adequate transportation out here. I mean, some of you came out despite the fact that there wasn't hardly any transportation to be here. But businesses really couldn't do that. So we had to spend a lot of time, and that's what I spent a lot of time on those transportation improvements, the Wheelie Avenue Bridge, widening Reston Avenue. Remember when Reston Avenue was 2 lanes? Well, that just proves you're too damn old. But the major, biggest thing that we worked on for a lot of years was, and ultimately started to happen in 1978, was getting the General Assembly to approve a toll road. And that was not received well by a lot of people in the local community, Herndon and Reston, particularly the surrounding area, because up to that point in the state of Virginia, there had never been a road that you have to pay to use. It was all built by Virginia Department of Highways. And Martha Panino, from a political standpoint, took some heat on that because she stood up and said, we really need to get this going. Well, it's interesting. The General Assembly approved that in 1978, and in that same year is when Sperry made the decision, or maybe it was just in 1979. It was based on that Sperry finally said they're going to bring a big corporation to Reston. And as the toll road became a fact by 1984 when it opened up, we already had 3, maybe 4 major corporations and lots of, Jim was talking to half a dozen more corporations like that. So transportation was really the key to making Reston bloom the way it has up to this point. The other thing I was involved with, Susie will talk about that too, was finding the right way to transition the homeowners association, but it was even bigger than that. It was the right way to start to transition the community from the idea of the developer does everything, says everything, everybody should be asking, especially if it had to do with money, the developer to actually do it, to start to get the adulthood of Reston started as far as internally doing your business. With that, I've talked much longer than everybody expected. But that's what you get when you don't get me on.
I think, Jim, are you going to talk from there, or what?
I'll come up there, I think.
Okay.
Initially, I'm just going to focus on 2 things. I was with the Mobile Years the whole time, 78 to 81 as marketing vice president, and then 81 to 84 as executive VP and general manager. And Jim Todd had left, Fran left to go off to greener pastures, and then from 84 to 96 when Mobile decided to get out of the land business, I was president here. Reston Land Corporation and Reston Town Center, Inc. And as Fran had mentioned, I want to talk about 2 things. The incredible buildup of the commercial side of Reston during the 80s, and then Reston Town Center. The things that I think are important, several of which were mentioned by our partner, Ken Wong, and the gentleman from ULI. By the way, just as an aside, Reston just won ULI's first annual Trends Award has to be for communities or projects that are 25 years old that have made a significant difference in the way Americans live. And the first ever Trend Award was just given to Reston Town Center. Boston Properties, which now owns all the commercial aspect of Town Center, the urban core, submitted this. They were kind enough to invite me to be part of it and accept the award. We didn't know whether we were going to win the award or not when we went downtown to the Reagan building, and lo and behold, we won the award. So it was terrific, and it was very nice of them to include me. But as Fran mentioned, so the toll road opened, but prior to the toll road opening, the fact that it was going to open attracted business. And Fran mentioned Tandem Computers, which came in from Cupertino, Silicon Valley, and Sperry, now Unisys, which is in Plaza America. And they took the two corners. Up to that point, we had a lot of small businesses. I see Fritz Bly in the back. We had Fritz's company, and a number of other companies. But and the one big one we had was not a company, but a division of the government, was the U.S. Geological Survey, and we thought that was going to bring a lot of other business when that was built in the 70s, but it didn't. It was kind of a standalone scientific agency. So. But the opening of the toll road, and the promise of it coming, attracted an incredible amount of business. And during the 80s, on average, very little bit each year, we did about 1 million square feet of office space every year for 10 years. That's 10 million square feet of office space. To give you an idea of what that means, the first phase of Town Center is, which includes the hotel, the 2 office buildings, and the big retail block with Clyde's and all the rest of it, is about 1.2 million square feet. The U.S. Geological Survey, that huge building that runs along the ridge there, and the big star portion is 5 stories, is about 1 million square feet. So we were doing that much every year for 10 years. Reston hasn't done 10 million square feet in the 25 years since, including what's been built in Town Center. So that gives you an idea of what happened in the 80s in the commercial marketplace. Boston Properties has about 4 million square feet in Town Center and Plaza America. I'm not quite sure what year that was built, but the office section. And sure, there have been some other buildings built, but most of what you see in Reston today is outside of Town Center, was built in the 80s. So it was huge, huge bonus. And of course, residential, subject to recessions. Everything's subject to recessions, but kept a pace and has kept a pace through the finishing of Reston in pretty much in the 90s outside of Town Center. So, so that was what was going on, and we became a net importer of jobs. In the meantime, while that was going on, you heard from Hunter Richardson, who was my marketing VP at the time. I had moved on, and I chaired a task force that Jim Todd asked us to form and look at that big purple blob on Bob's master plan and decide what we were going to do with it. And we knew with malls all around us and so forth that that's not what we wanted to be. I mean, we're bigger than a village center, and what kind of a bread box were we going to be? So what we became is an unanchored, outdoor shopping plaza, if you will, that had everything you needed in mixed use, from hotels, theaters, bars, restaurants, office buildings. The only thing we didn't have initially was residential, and Bob gave me hell every time he saw me about that. But we kept thinking about it all the time. We come down here to Lake Anne for concerts, and people living in the apartments upstairs, that are apartments then, were complaining about the noise of the concerts. And furthermore, Mobile didn't want to take the chance. So yeah, they still are. Okay, Joe. Any case, so we didn't do that. We built Stratford House across the street, and later on, we built a lot of other residential. Interestingly enough, when we built Town Center, we had a zoning. We went in 1984 after 3 years of planning in 81 to 84. Then we had 3 years of zoning in 84 to 87. Some 50-odd community meetings, and Joe was involved very much as head of the Planning and Zoning Committee. And John Tillman, our planning commissioner, was terrific working with Martha, and everybody was very supportive of what we were doing. Obviously, people had different ideas on specifics, but so 84 to 87. 87, we got our zoning. In the meantime, Mobile had agreed that we could, nobody seemed to understand what we were doing, even Jim Rouse. When it was mentioned that we went Hunter mentioned in the film that we went to ULI and they said, you've got to either be suburban or urban. And Jim Rouse looked at our plans. Of course, he developed Columbia, but he was a mall developer. And he looked at our plan and said, good luck. And nobody really kind of got what we were doing. Well, today everybody gets it. White Flint is now going to get torn down, and we're in Rockville, and become more of a town center. They still have to deal with that, possibly, yeah. So, in any event, so we have set a trend, and there's no question that it's been hugely successful, and there's a lot of lessons we've learned out of it. And I think the biggest thing overall is the community that we had here and the county that we had to work with, and the supervisor and the planning commissioner, because the developer and the community and the jurisdiction all have to work together as one to make something like this happen. And often that is not the case. And as Joe knows, we had 50-some meetings with the community and the county. But we got great zoning. We knew this was going to be 25, 30, it's 25 years right now, and town center isn't begun to be finished, and won't be for another 10 years, 15 years. Metro won't be here for 5 years now, it looks like, for the town center. And there's all sorts of development going to happen along Sunset Hills Road. So, but our zoning allows us to do anything we want in any given parcel, which is really rather remarkable for the county to do that, but we have to go back to the planning commission review and approval. But we were going to be anchored by 2 hotels, like Coffee Place in Back Bay, Boston, if you've ever been there, which is a Westin and a Marriott. But there wasn't any market for major hotels, so after we left, our successor, Terrebrook, decided to do Midtown condominiums, and so they had the ability to do that without going through a zoning. They did have to go to the planning commission, which said fine. They had to build the park, but the park was in the master plan, and I remember telling Bob this once. They sold 6 acres, Terrebrook, to Kettler to build Midtown for $35 million, and Bob had bought 6,700 acres for $12 million, and I said, at that rate, Bob, you could have bought 2 acres. Yeah. I've got a lot of things I could say, but it's time to move on to others, and we can talk later.
We're going to let Susie go first, though. Ladies first.
That's what I'm doing.
He's not going
I don't have anything to say after you.
Well, that's the problem. So we'll move into the community and what was happening in the community.
Okay. What I wanted to talk about tonight was really citizen participation. And as Jim and Fran alluded to, we were in the 80s, which is when I got involved with the Reston Association. I ran for the board in 81. And then the president needed to move and told me after about a year and a half of being on the board, and this was my first real experience in citizen participation, that I was going to have to be president. So it sort of threw me for a loop, but I will say I truly enjoyed it, and that was really the beginning of my citizen engagement, which has been what my passion for all the years that I've lived in Reston. We moved here in '73, and so we were here for a few years before I got involved. I think Reston, by the time we got to when Fran was talking about the young adulthood stage, we had really gotten through the worst of the developer and resident controversy. And although Fran and I, having sat in lots of these citizen meetings and being a little scared sometimes at some of the vehemence, there certainly was a residue that, as those of you who've been involved know, lasted for many, many years. I think we are beyond that now. But I think by the time we got to the 80s, there really was what I would call a 3-legged stool of cooperation. And there was the developer and the residents and the government, as exemplified by Martha Panino. And we really did have a spirit of cooperation and mutual respect. And I think that was And the citizens really have participated throughout all of Reston's history in making this community what it is today. During the Gulf years, we had people got involved with RCA because after Bob Simon was fired and left town immediately, people were very scared about what was going to happen with respect to the master plan, will it be implemented? And then also there were a lot of services. This was a very small community at the time, some services that we needed and we didn't have. So the citizen participation really was focused on RCA, Reston Community Association, which was a watchdog organization to start with, and later it became an advocacy organization as well. So RCA was formed and citizens got involved in that, and I think, and I wasn't here at the time, but I think this was really where the action was in the community. And then also there were, especially down at the Common Ground, and the Episcopal Church had a lot to do with this, of the formation of the Ribs Bus and the Common Ground, and churches came together to form Reston Interfaith. These were some very basic services that were needed in the community at the time. And then the mobile years were more of growing up years, where we began to really greatly expand the cultural, sports, organizations. So I think one of Reston's hallmarks is that many of our institutions were created by and sustained by volunteer energy. I mean, volunteerism in this community is just a way of life, and it's very exciting to be here. If you want to get involved, you can get involved in a whole myriad of different kinds of activities. I wanted to talk about the 4 civic organizations and kind of what that meant with respect to the community. Our organizations, the one I know best is the Reston Association. Now, it was definitely not a volunteer organization to start out with. There were 2 homeowners associations when one was on the Lake Anne side, one was on the Hunters Wood side, and when they were merged, that was kind of the beginning of the troubles, because people really disagreed with one another. People felt like there were different lifestyles on both sides, and so there was a lot of argument after the consolidation of those 2 associations. So, but the developer always had in mind in 1985, we were to transition from developer control of the association to resident control. So, and I so admired the planning and intentionality of involving citizens, slowly but steadily, until we got to 1985, when the board became 5 residents and 4 developers. Before that, there was a rural council and a board of directors that was dominated by the developer. But in '85, we worked very closely with the developer, or before that too, to conduct that transition. Formed a documents review committee. Some of you, I think, in this room were on that committee. And we basically rewrote the basic documents, the deed and the articles and the bylaws of the association. And in that whole 2 years we worked on that, and Linda Singer was reminding me tonight about that committee. We really re-envisioned what kind of governance that we wanted to have with of our common lands. And some significant changes were made at that time, and all of this came from the residents. Renters became part of the association, so we went from the Reston Homeowners Association to the Reston Association. We put a maintenance covenant in the documents and developed a covenants committee so that people would have to maintain, not only have changes to their property approved, but maintain their property. Cap on the assessments, and sorry about that one. I don't think that was such a good idea, but the whole governance structure, we created at-large directors and district directors and so forth. So we really took ownership of the association, and I think, and once that happened, then really all the angst about between the developer and the residents really dissipated and went away. Another organization that was totally citizen-driven, and many of you in this room know a lot more about it than I do, is RCA, the Reston Community Association. And RCA, as I said before, was formed as a watchdog on the developer, but really expanded greatly to involve a lot of advocacy on a lot of different social issues. But one of the most important parts, if not the most important part of RCA, was the Planning and Zoning Committee, and I know several of you in here have been active on that. And the Planning and Zoning Committee really, there was an incredible amount of citizen participation in the whole planning process. And citizens really did have a big say. But then again, the reason citizens had a big say is because they were responsible, they did their homework. The hundreds of hours that people have described to me of people participating in these RCA meetings is just incredible. And, but also the government through Martha Panino gave RCA also, wanted to hear from the citizens and felt that was valuable. So her sanctioning that and inviting that was a very important part of the process. And the developer saw the value in it as well. So again, the three-pronged people coming together to create this community. I talked to John Tillman a bit about the creation of some of the organizations around RCA and the importance and what it was significant difference the existence of the Planning and Zoning Committee made to the development of Reston. Another organization is Reston Community Center, and this is another example. In 1979, this community center opened its doors, so that's right at the point where Mobile took over Reston. But this was another citizen-led effort. The idea came from the residents, the idea was fleshed out, the referendum was conducted by the residents, the idea of creating the tax district came from the residents, and we made that a reality. Now it's grown up, and we have a very large permanent staff, but still the residents are on the board and create the policy. The Reston Chamber of Commerce is another organization that was founded by residents, business leaders, and now has grown and become institutionalized. So now, it's not that there wasn't tension between the developer and the citizens, and Fran and I can tell lots of stories. We laugh. Sometimes when one of my favorites was sitting with Tom Kenny, who was our attorney over at South Lakes High School, and I don't know why we ever did this, but the people were sitting up in the stands, and we were sitting down on the floor, and people were yelling at us, and then we got to the point where Fran always had this whole passel of votes. How many votes did you have, Fran? They varied, but
more than anybody else.
And so at the point where he would cast his votes, we just kind of sit there and cringe and wait for the shoe to drop. But that's all gone away, really. And I'm just so proud of this community and the way we're able to come together from whatever our perspectives are, whatever our roles are, to really create the great community that we have today. And one final thing, when some of you may know that I worked with Vicki and Rebecca on the Reston film, and when we first started out, we were kind of looking for the controversy, and finally it occurred to us that the real story of Reston is how we work together, and that is an important story indeed in this day and age. Thank you.
Well, that's a tough crowd to follow. I'm Bill Bowie. I guess the best description of me would be that I'm a serial community volunteer. And I've probably touched your lives, all of your lives, in one way or another in the last 30 years. So it's been a pleasure. But I moved here 30 years ago and a business relocation from Detroit, Michigan. I lived in one place, grew up in the city, watching my Tigers, Lions, Pistons, Red Wings. Absolutely loving life. Was a high school coach and an athletic director, and came here to the most beautiful community that I'd ever seen. Picked a house, and here we are today. I made the mistake of walking into too many places at the wrong time. That was probably my biggest problem. My company was the very first tenant, though, in Centennial Park, 1850 Centennial Park Drive. We opened up there on May 6th, 1985, before the parking lot had even been paved, right there at the metro station. So it was a long time ago. But my kids at the time when we moved here, they were 2 years and 18 and 6 months old. And my wife was looking for a job and trying to get something going. So she said, you know what, we should get these kids involved in something. I said, okay. So she signed them up for swimming. So on Saturday morning, my duty was to walk them through the Reston Community Center and take them to their swim classes, whatever they call them, baby class, or whatever. They were drowning the kids. So I sat there like a bum on the wall, keeping my mouth shut. But one Saturday I walked through there, and there was a gentleman with a table set up like this, a gentleman by the name of Mike Mopat. Mike was the president of Reston Movement. I walked by, he said, good morning. I said, good morning. I kept walking. He said, hey, come back here for a second. He says, that young man play ball? No, he doesn't. We're on our way to swimming. So, needless to say, we ended up signing up for T-ball. And we signed up for T-ball. And I got a call 48 hours after I signed up for T-ball. And he said, you know, there are 14 kids on this team, they don't have a coach. Would you like to be a coach? Sure, why the heck not? I'll coach. I got drafted twice. I know a little bit about baseball. So I took over. 14 kids on my team, you have no idea. To this very day, I hang out with 11 of those parents from that original 14 coaches. They've become our best friends. And I know where all of those kids are. It's so cool over the years. But 2 weeks after I became a coach, it happened to be our biggest year for organizing. We had 250 kids in T-ball, 20 teams. T-ball commissioner quit before all the scheduling had to be done. So I got that call. Bill, would you like to be the coach and the commissioner? Sure. No problem. Got no problem with that. So took that on, made it to the fall. There was a coup going on in this little thing called Reston Youth Baseball where they wanted to elect a new president or something. And they said, since you're a commissioner, you got to vote. So you need to go to this meeting over in Brown's Chapel. So I go over there, and needless to say, I got sucked into that as well. I think it's stepping forward. It never works for me because when somebody said, would you know, we need a chairman. Would somebody who wants to be chairman step forward? And I stood there and everybody else stepped back. So I went from having a child to 14 children to almost 1,200 kids. And it was the biggest Little League we've ever had. We had Little League, we had Babe Ruth, we had Senior Babe Ruth, we took on the girls, we adopted a Clark Griffin team for the college kids. And the greatest thing is that baseball brought so much to this community. Fran was a part of starting a Reston Little League. Reston Little League, before the town center was built, Reston Little League provided the biggest event in Reston. And that was the Reston Baseball Carnival in the parking lot of the Sheraton where the Westin Hotel and all those buildings sit today. For 2.5 weeks, for 18 long days and nights. That was the place where the carnies came. Tuesday and Thursday were all you could ride. Don Bellardo says you couldn't sell green hot dogs. I made a liar out of him. You could, we did. But it was a place where family from all over the place. People came from as far as Sterling and Herndon, Virginia. But it was a place to be. It was a safe place. It was a very safe place because at the end of the night, it was an all-cash business. So at the end of the night, I would go sit down with this woman that had 3 teeth, and we would count out the money, and she would put the money in her pocket, and I'd put the money in my pocket, and then hope and pray that nobody would rob me on the way home. And then we said, you know, this has got to be a better way to do it. So over those 18 nights, we would raise pretty much our entire budget for the year. We would We raised about $40,000 over the 18 nights. And then as we were introduced, as we heard about the development of the property, the carnival was going to go away, we came up with something called Batathon. And our first year in Batathon, we raised $120,000 in one day. Not a bad take. Needless to say, the carnival went to the wayside. We never had to do that again. But Little League Baseball, just baseball in general, meant so much because we had a community day. And on our community day, we'd all take our team pictures. We would all get our pictures taken with the teams. We'd all go out. But we worked in collaboration with RA, and every team was assigned a section of Reston to go pick up and clean up. That happened every year. RA would provide all the rakes and shovels and garbage bags, and we'd have 800 kids out in the streets, out in the stream valleys picking up things. But again, it was part of the community, something we had never seen. We heard about the homeless shelter opening. We heard about the Emory Rucker shelter, the beginnings of interfaith. So then our kids, we said, you know what? Our kids should learn to give back. So our kids started having their own food drives. They'd bring canned food to the games. So we would help, fill the shelters up, which was tremendous. So our program grew and continued to grow. Then Town Center was built, and we didn't know what it meant. It was a great retail center, great hotel, great new place, but nobody had any idea what it meant. And I had a mate, an office mate, on the other side of the wall, Miss Karen Cleveland, and Karen was at the time starting up a chamber in Reston, and her kids were playing ball at the same time. And she says, we really should do something special. We really need to think about what do other towns do. And in the meantime, if you know anything about Reston baseball, all you heard about was how great Vienna was. You got sick of that, how great Vienna was. So what we ended up doing is somebody somehow introduced me to this magnificent man in the Eiffel Tower, and got a meeting with him. It's Jim Cleveland. And I went. I was on the third floor. Third floor. Third floor. But anyway, I took the idea to Jim after talking with Karen and others. Took the idea to Jim about starting the opening day parade at Town Center on Main Street. And so we started that activity the first spring that Town Center was open, and it still exists today. Bigger and better than ever. And I'm just proud of it to see the kids every year. We heard about a group in Pennsylvania starting a division for the handicapped called the Challenger Division. So we adopted the Challenger Division, and today we still have the biggest Challenger Division in all of Northern Virginia. And if you've never seen anything like it, you should go out on a Friday night or a Sunday afternoon, and all the older kids are paired up with an impaired kid, and it's some of the best baseball you've ever seen. As they say, when I play, it looks like baseball from a helicopter. So that's all you need to know about that. Reston has always been important because of the planning and the thoughtfulness that all the citizens bring to it. In 1990, there was a task force created called Reston 2020. And how many? Almost 100 citizens involved in that. And I chaired the Arts and Parks committee on that. And we basically wrote a strategic plan for what we wanted to see over the next 20 years in Reston. And, I'm proud to say a lot of that that we put, because I looked at it the other day, a lot of that stuff that we put down in 1990 has come to fruition. And there's a lot more exciting things to occur here in the next few years. Two other things for you. There was one particular bad word, and continues to be a bad word in Reston. I embarked upon a 9-year journey to get lights over at Crabtree Field and succeeded, which was absolutely great. And the county didn't, the park authority didn't quite know what to do, because we went to them and we said, look, if you work with us, we will pay for these lights. Something you've probably heard of the Reston a lot. Reston Little League footed the bill for that entire complex of lights to be put in, which was absolutely amazing. We raised $120,000. I found some bank that